Hello, my name's Carolyn Menteith and I'm here today with Trevor Cooper to talk about breed-specific legislation. So Trevor, we've heard an awful lot in the news recently about breed-specific legislation, but what is it?
Breed-specific legislation is a law that says that certain breeds of dog are more dangerous than others, and therefore specific controls need to be imposed in order to protect the public.
So can you tell me how breed-specific legislation was introduced into the UK?
It goes back to 1991. At the time, it appeared as if there was a spate of incidents involving dogs and people, particularly children. So Parliament took the view that there needed to be specific controls on ownership and possession of those types of dog which they felt did pose a threat to public safety. And owners of those dogs were given a very limited period of time in which to have their possession of the dog legitimised. So they were able to keep the dog, but provided they complied with very stringent exemption scheme requirements.
So what are the breeds of dogs that we're talking about here?
Well, it is a bit odd because although we call it breed-specific legislation, the way Parliament has drafted the Dangerous Dogs Act, it actually prescribes types, not breeds. And there are 4 types which are specifically mentioned as being bred for fighting and therefore, according to Parliament, pose a threat to public safety. They are the dog of the type known as the Pit Bull Terrier, the Japanese Tosa, the Fila Brasileiro and the Dogo Argentino.
Now I suppose these are the types of dogs that people think of as being status dogs, and the public perception seems to be that these are dogs who are owned by criminals, by gang members, by drug dealers. Is that a fair representation, do you think?
Well, I suppose it's a fair representation for those dogs which are owned by gang members, drug dealers and what have you. But by no means are all of these dogs owned by the criminal fraternity. From my experience, the vast majority of these dogs are owned by ordinary people who had no idea that their particular dog was going to grow up to become an illegal-looking dog.
Now I know this is many dog owners' worst nightmare. So how do they know if they might have an illegal dog?
Well, this of course is the $6 million question. How can you establish whether or not a particular dog is lawful or unlawful? Dogs don't come with labels attached. The principal cases that we've had have been about the dog of the type known as the Pit Bull Terrier. And the way the High Court has determined it is that you look at the dog's physical conformation, so what the dog looks like. And if the dog substantially conforms to the Pit Bull breed standard that we use from America, then that dog is regarded as being a Pit Bull type. The High Court has gone on to say that the behaviour of the dog is relevant, but it's not conclusive. So you might well think that in view of technological advances that we now have a DNA test that we can do on dogs to determine whether or not that dog is legal or illegal, but we don't. It is principally on what the dog looks like. So if that particular dog that we're looking at is a Pit Bull looking dog, then it's likely to be regarded as a Pit Bull Terrier type and therefore unlawful unless it's been exempted from the prohibition.
So if you've rehomed a really nice little puppy and suddenly it grows up and you think, I'm really worried that this could be of an illegal type, what do you do?
Well, it is a criminal offence if you have possession or custody of a dog of the type known as a Pit Bull Terrier unless that dog has been exempted. Now, because of the way the law is structured, it says that the dog is illegal unless you prove that it's legal. So that reversal of the burden of proof is extremely unusual in the law in Great Britain. So there is no way nowadays that an owner can voluntarily make an application to the Index of Exempted Dogs for their dogs to be legitimised. The only way it can be done now is by a court order, and that will be at the behest of the police. So the only way of making an illegal dog legal is if the police are asked to make an application against you, which will go to the magistrates' court, and the magistrates will then determine the case.
So if you do have a dog that you thought was a Labrador cross or whatever you thought it was, and you suddenly are worried about the fact that it could be an illegal dog, is it better than just to keep quiet and not tell anybody?
Well, as a solicitor, of course, I'm never going to tell somebody to bury their heads in the sand. It is, of course, much better that you, in those circumstances, come forward to the police and ask. Because it may well be that even though you might fear that your dog has become an illegal dog, it actually isn't. So there are now dog legislation officers in England and Wales who have been specifically trained to deal with the law relating to dogs. They can examine your dog on your behalf, and if they believe that your dog is unlawful, then the case can proceed. But beware that there's every likelihood that your dog will be seized and detained by the police until the case has been concluded. Since March 2015, the police in England and Wales have had the power to allow a dog to be returned even before it goes to court, a form of doggy bail if you like, but not every police force is using that provision.
So while people who have concerns can take their dogs to the police, I think one of the things that people worry about a lot is, are there other ways that their dogs are going to come to the attention of the authorities?
Well, it could be as simple as the police have seen the dog. So it may be that perhaps you've been walking the dog, or perhaps they've seen it in the garden, because once they've observed the dog, if that gives them sufficient information to say the dog is of a pit bull terrier type, then this whole process can flow from there. Or it could of course be someone complained, so maybe it's a neighbour that's complained about the dog, maybe it's a former partner who's complained that they believe you have an unlawful looking dog. Or it may be that the dog has been involved in an incident, or perhaps picked up as a stray, in which case, yes, it might come to the attention of the authorities in that manner. So yes, it can be a very wide set of circumstances, which may include the dog acting in a dangerous fashion, but generally no. Generally, the dogs come to the attention of the police just because of the way that they look, not because they've done anything wrong.
And the thing is, though, that dogs change very much as they get older. What a dog's going to be like as a tiny puppy is going to be really, really different as an adult. So at what point in that age process can you tell whether or not this dog's an illegal dog? Can you look at a litter of 8-week-old puppies and say, these are illegal dogs?
Again, another good question, which sadly doesn't have a black and white answer here. Yeah, of course a dog is going to grow as it grows older. But it's a conformational test, so does the dog look like a pit bull terrier type? Well, you just can't tell when it's a tiny puppy. It depends on the expert as to how old they take the view the dog has to be before you can definitively make an assessment. Many experts take the view you can't be sure until the dog is at least 9 months old. But that, of course, leaves a big problem for puppies growing up to 9 months old, because if the dog should grow into being an illegal looking dog, well, when are you supposed to find out? Because if you can't get it assessed before 9 months, what do you do in those circumstances? There just isn't an easy answer to that.
Given that puppies grow up to be very different, and especially if you've got mixed breeds, so if the mother and the father are completely different, all those puppies in that litter are going to look different. So could you get a situation where some puppies in the litter are illegal dogs and others aren't?
Well, it might well sound bizarre, but yes, you could have a litter of puppies, some of which would grow up to become pit bull terrier types, some wouldn't become pit bull terrier types. That's, as you've rightly said, because of the way in which puppies grow. They don't all turn out as identikits. But if the particular dog has sufficient characteristics to be regarded as a pit bull terrier type, that's what in fact it is. And that's even if neither of the parents are pit bull terriers.
So if somebody did do that, if they brought their dog to the attention of the police, what can they expect and what sort of timescale can they expect?
If the police are satisfied that your dog has sufficient characteristics to be regarded as a pit bull terrier type dog, then of course they will seize the dog and will either detain it pending the conclusion of the case, or subject to where you are in the police's opinion, they may allow you to have the dog back on doggy bail, subject to the case being concluded at court. The police will issue proceedings either as a prosecution under Section 1 of the Act, or they'll issue an application under Section 4B of the Act. Now, the distinction between the two is important. If you're prosecuted under Section 1 of the Act, then you may qualify for legal aid, whereas if it's an application under Section 4B, there is no legal aid possible.
So in that case, what can an owner expect when it goes to court?
Well, if you are in a position to defend, so you have experts to say that the dog doesn't have sufficient characteristics to be regarded as a pit bull terrier type, then in due course there will be a trial and the magistrates will consider it on the available evidence. The alternative is, of course, that you admit that your dog is a pit bull terrier type. The burden of proof is then on you to prove that the dog would not constitute a danger to public safety. And that requires the court to consider the temperament of the dog, that includes its past behaviour, and the court must have regard to you, so whether or not they're satisfied that you are a fit and proper person to have charge of the dog. So if you can prove to the court that the dog is a nice dog and that you are a responsible dog owner, then the court can allow your possession of the dog to be legitimised. So basically, the court can say, right, we're satisfied this is an illegal dog, but it's a nice dog, you're a responsible owner, we're going to allow you to have that dog, so basically to exempt it from the prohibition. So that will require you to have the dog put onto the index of exempted dogs, and you have 2 months from the date of the hearing to do that.
So if that were to happen, what are the conditions of exemption?
The conditions of the exemption are onerous. There's a fee payable to DEFRA, which is £92.40. But in addition to that payment, the dog has to be neutered, has to be microchipped, has to be insured against third-party risks. It has to be muzzled and on a lead when in a public place. That lead has to be held by someone not less than 16 years of age. The dog has to be kept in secure conditions when at home so that it can't escape. It can't be given away, it can't be sold, it can't be abandoned. Furthermore, the dog has to remain living with the person in whose name the dog is exempted, except for up to 30 days in each year.
I suppose what all dog owners are thinking, though, is what's the worst that can happen?
If you are prosecuted under Section 1 of the Dangerous Dogs Act and you either plead guilty or the case is proven against you, then you will get a criminal conviction. Over and above that, there may well be punishment, and that can include prison of up to 6 months and or a fine. But whether it's a case under Section 1 or an application under Section 4B, in addition to considering what should be done to the dog, the court is likely to order you to pay further monies. And that can include kennelling fees, they could be substantial. It can include the police and the prosecution costs, and they could also be substantial.
I've got to say that sounds deeply, deeply unfair, because surely we're just talking about dogs that haven't done anything, that just look a certain way.
Well, clearly I can only talk about the cases that my firm has dealt with, and in our experience, you're entirely right. Yes, these dogs largely are just ordinary family pets that haven't done anything wrong at all. But bear in mind that isn't the case with every single dog, and there are occasions when any type of dog is going to act out of character, whether that be a pit bull terrier type or another type of dog. So I'm not going to sit here and say every pit bull terrier is blameless, because there may well be occasions when a pit bull terrier type dog has done something wrong. But from my experience, in the vast majority of cases, these are just ordinary pets that have become embroiled in these proceedings through no fault of their own, other than for the dint of what they look like. And is it unfair? Yeah, of course it's unfair, but it's the law.
So assuming your dog has been seized, what's the likelihood of getting your dog back?
Well, of course, I can never give anybody a guarantee that the dog is going to come home. I also can't tell them definitively how long it's going to take either. And I appreciate that does make people very, very worried. It used to be hopeless. Between 1991 and 1997, it was mandatory for the court to order destruction of the dog. So it's bad now, but it was worse before. provided it's a nice dog and provided the court finds that you are a responsible dog owner, then yes, you should get your dog back. I can't promise it for absolutely certain, but there's a very good likelihood that you will. We've currently got over 3,000 dogs on the index of exempted dogs. So that means in over 3,000 cases, owners have gone before the court and they've been able to prove to the satisfaction of the magistrates that they're responsible and that their dog is safe.
I know you've said you're not prepared to talk about timescale, but what's the shortest it can take and what's the longest it can take?
Well, the quickest that we've had is a week. That's from the point of seizure to the date that the case is concluded at court. But these cases can go on for weeks and months. The police have 6 months to issue proceedings from the date of seizure. And if you choose to defend the case, then yes, the case can go on for a significant period of time, because you're then stuck with when the court can allocate sufficient time to hear the case and when the experts are available to actually come to court to give evidence. So there isn't an easy answer to it. I don't want to suggest to anybody that you admit that your dog is a pit bull type if in fact it isn't. But clearly it is your choice. But the risk in defending is that the dog is likely to be away from home for a considerable period of time.
Now, you said earlier that one of the conditions of exemption was that the dog has to stay with the owner. But what happens if for some reason the owner can't keep the dog?
This is one of the areas, in fact, where the law has been tightened. So the exemption conditions are actually now more stringent than they were even before March of 2015. So the position now is that once a dog has been with somebody else for more than 30 days in a year, then the dog will then become an unlawful dog again. You can only lawfully transfer keepership of that dog, so to allow somebody else to have it, if you've died or if you're so seriously ill you just can't look after the dog anymore. And in either of those circumstances, then the new proposed keeper needs to make an application to a court for them to consider whether or not to allow that change of keepership to take place. This is, of course, particularly harsh if you just can't keep the dog because your circumstances might have changed. So say, for example, you just can't afford the dog anymore, or maybe you've had to move home to somewhere where you can't have a dog. So perhaps you've gone into a flat where there's a restriction on having pets. Or perhaps you need to travel overseas and you just can't take the dog with you. But it would seem that in any of those circumstances, you just can't lawfully transfer the dog to somebody else because the law now just doesn't allow it.
So after saying all of that, what's your opinion of breed-specific legislation?
The intention behind breed-specific legislation is a good one. None of us want to have dangerous dogs. And this concept of weeding out potentially dangerous dogs before they have a chance to do anything wrong is, of course, great, provided it is indeed these potentially dangerous dogs that you are in fact weeding out. And that's where I think we have got it wrong. We've now had breed-specific legislation for a quarter of a century, 25 years we've had it. Yet if you look at the figures, dogs are still biting people. So if the idea was to eradicate dangerous dogs, well, it hasn't worked. Perhaps what we need is a complete rethink. So let's move away from demonising dogs because of the way that they look. Let's move away from criminalising dog owners because they have a dog that looks the wrong shape. And perhaps our emphasis should be more on the owner rather than on the type of dog that owner has. Carolyn, I've now explained what the law is about, but I think it's going to be helpful if you can help us on the behaviour side of it. And I have a lot of questions for you, so brace yourself.
I'm braced.
Do some breeds of dog behave differently to other breeds of dog?
That's a really good question because, yes, absolutely. All different breeds and types of dogs behave differently because that's how we created breeds. When you look at how we started to have all these massive variety in breeds, It's because we took dogs that were really, really good at doing a certain job, bred them to other dogs that were really good at doing a certain job, to produce dogs who were almost specialists in their individual behaviours. So while Border Collies will chase balls and Retrievers will bring your slippers back, there's different behaviour in every single breed of dog.
Well, some members of the public might well think that some dogs are more likely to be dangerous than others because of their breed. Are they wrong in that assumption?
I'm not sure it's really helpful to say that some breeds are more dangerous than others, because any dog can behave dangerously. From the tiniest little Yorkshire Terrier to the biggest Great Dane, any dog can bite, any dog can knock somebody over, any dog can scratch somebody. So there's always that potential in absolutely any dog. So saying are some breeds more dangerous really isn't helpful. But there's no doubt that some dogs, because of what we've originally bred them to do, and just by merit of their sheer size and power, if they did do something wrong, they could cause more injury. And so it's far more important looking at being responsible. And if you've got a big, strong, powerful dog, you have to be more responsible. Because if they do anything which a smaller dog could do without any problems whatsoever, they are more likely to cause injury. So just saying we should be more careful with 4 breeds of dogs is absolutely crazy. We need to be responsible for the behaviour of all our dogs, whatever they are.
Well, if some dogs can be regarded then as more dangerous than others, how can we determine which dog is more likely to be dangerous than others?
When we're looking at dogs and saying whether they're dangerous or not, that's not quite the most helpful way to start off. I mean, yes, some dogs are bigger, they are more powerful, they're stronger, and therefore for these dogs, owners, people who choose to breed those dogs, and people who want to work with those dogs need to possibly have a higher degree of responsibility. They have to make sure that these dogs are properly bred to start with, that they're properly socialised and habituated when they're younger, that they're properly trained, and that they're rehomed responsibly. And then the new owner has to take more responsibility for that dog. Not because it's inherently more dangerous because of its behaviour, but it's more dangerous potentially because of its size, because of its shape, because of the power of that dog. So it's far more about how we work with these dogs and our responsibilities to these dogs than it is because they look a certain way or because they're a certain type.
So is Parliament wrong then to assume that a pit bull terrier type is more dangerous than another type of dog?
You can't say that a pit bull terrier type is more dangerous than another dog, and for it to be helpful at all. You can train any dog to be dangerous. I could train you an attack pack of chihuahuas if you wanted, and they would be pretty fearsome. But by merit of the fact that they're small and that they can't do very much damage, what they can do in terms of injury is very, very slight. So actually taking the view that some breeds are more dangerous than others isn't really helpful. Any dog can bite, all dogs have teeth. And any dogs who are fearful, who are worried, who are apprehensive, who haven't been properly bred, haven't been properly socialised, or haven't been properly trained, can potentially cause injury. And that's what we should be looking at. We shouldn't be looking at what a dog looks like, or what that breed is. We just have to look at responsible ownership, responsible breeding, and responsible education.
So is there any way of predicting if a particular dog is going to grow up to become a dangerous dog?
Most puppies are a totally blank canvas, and so how they grow up is very much determined by how they're bred, the temperament of the mother to start with, so then how they're bred, how they're socialised in those very, very, very early weeks when they're growing their personalities, they're growing their behaviours, they're growing how they interact with the world. So that's really, really important. So first of all, if we get a dog who's had a bad upbringing, that's one of the problems with puppy farms and with illegal imports, is you don't know what kind of start that dog has had. And that is really, really important. We can prevent the majority of behaviour problems if we just dealt with the first 16 weeks of life properly. So first of all, we have to say, how has this dog been bred? Has this dog been bred responsibly? And if the answer is no, or I don't know, well, maybe there's a bit more of a question mark on how that dog's going to behave in the future. So possibly your responsibility has to be greater. Very, very few puppies are born potentially dangerous. There are a few of them, but they're incredibly rare. So it's the experiences that dog has. So that's one of the other reasons that actually saying a dog looks a certain way isn't very helpful to say how that dog's going to behave. It's what experiences that dog's had, how that dog's been managed, what its background's been.
Are there any warning signs that an owner needs to look out for when they get a dog? How are they going to know if they're buying a dog that's likely to become dangerous?
One of the most important decisions that you're going to make as an owner is, first of all, what breed you want, because you have to make sure that that breed fits into your lifestyle, that you can give that dog all the exercise that he needs. Because that's really important, because if dogs are frustrated and stressed, they're more likely to behave in ways that we don't want. So make sure that that dog is going to fit into your lifestyle, and you can give that dog the outlet for all the things that we have bred him to need to do. So if he's a retriever, he's going to want to bring you slippers and he's going to want to go and chase balls. If he's a border collie, then you've got a high energy dog, and that dog has to be able to fit into what you can give that dog. So once you've selected the perfect breed for you, and that's really, really important, you need to look at where you're going to get that dog from. Find a good, responsible breeder. Find someone who rears the puppy in the house, that rears the puppy to be used to all those things that your dog is going to have to get used to as part of a family pet. So that is children, it is other dogs, it's visitors, it's all the things that you're going to want him to be happy and confident with when he's an adult dog. The majority of behaviour problems come from fears, phobias and frustration in dogs, and we can solve most of those by getting a good dog that's well trained, well socialised, well habituated, that fits into our lifestyle, and that then we take responsibility for giving that dog the outlet for the exercise requirements that he needs, for his hardwired behaviours that he needs, and just keep him a happy dog. Then you're far, far less likely to get into problems, behaviour problems.
But of course, Carolyn, we both work for rescues, don't we? We've talked about getting a puppy from a breeder, but what should people be looking for then when getting a rescue dog?
There are some great advantages to getting a rescue dog, because what you see is what you get. You know what that dog is going to grow into because he's already there in front of you. So most importantly is be responsible. Again, think about if that dog is going to fit into your life. Not just size, shape, whether you like the look of him, but whether you can give him all those exercise requirements that he needs, and then spend some time with him. A good rescue organisation, like the ones that we work for, will assess dogs really well. Talk to the staff, find out what that dog is like to live with, what he's like with people, what he's like with other dogs, and you can tell a lot about a dog. Forget about what he looks like. Forget about what size he is, what shape he is. As long as he fits into your life, that he is friendly, that he wants to be with you, then you're not going to go far wrong, and take the advice of rescue staff.
So if your opinion is that you can't assume a dog is going to be dangerous just because of the way that it looks, are there perhaps restrictions that should be placed on breeders that would help? Because you've indicated that breeding and responsible breeding is an issue here.
All breeders should take responsibility for the puppies that they breed. And that means that part of that responsibility is making sure that they go to appropriate people. It's as important for a good breeder to vet new owners as it is for new owners to get their puppy from a responsible breeder. So they need to make sure that owners are responsible, that the owners will make sure the dog's trained, will make sure that the dog is social, will make sure that the dog gets an outlet for what he needs. But more importantly than that, that they make sure that owners understand the responsibility that comes with that dog. And it's not because dogs are inherently dangerous as such, but if someone is taking on a big, strong dog, they have to understand the responsibilities that come with that.
So, in your opinion, does breed-specific legislation work?
Hopefully it's been really clear from what I've said over the last few questions that absolutely any dog, if it's not properly brought up and not properly looked after, can behave dangerously. So the breed-specific legislation and just telling us that there's 4 dogs that are more likely to do this is really, really not helpful. It lures everybody into a false sense of security. because we kind of think, oh, well, those dogs are taken care of, so everything else is safe, which isn't true. It's about owner responsibility. It's about taking responsibility for dogs you breed, dogs you train, and the dogs that you own to make sure that they don't behave dangerously. Breed-specific legislation absolutely doesn't work to do that. We need to look at the law, we need to change the law, we need to look at the top end of the lead and not the bottom end of the lead if we actually want to prevent dangerous dogs.
Well, thanks very much, Carolyn. So it does seem as if both on a legal point of view as well as on a behaviour point of view that breed-specific legislation doesn't work.